Hello. I'm Molly Carlisle. You ever watch someone you love lie dying, while the people closest to them plot what they'll take before the body's even cold? I did. In the ICU, my father's new wife whispered, "Pull the plug, God's removing the unworthy." And he nodded. Just nodded. They thought I'd walk away, quiet, obedient, erased. But I stayed. And I listened. And I watched every single lie crack wide open. What if the real fight for justice doesn't start with lawyers, but with daughters like me, who refuse to be erased? Would you want to know how it ends? The elevator doors opened with a faint ding that echoed through the sterile corridor. I stepped out, my shoes making soft taps against the polished linoleum floor. The smell of antiseptic filled my lungs, sharp and cold. I hated hospitals, the stillness, the wait time seemed to slow and stretch until even breathing felt intrusive. But here I was again, clutching my mother's old notebook against my chest as if it could protect me. Massachusetts General had always felt too bright, too clean for the kind of pain people carried inside it. I told myself I came to check on Dad, not to make peace. That promise I made to my mother before she died still lived somewhere in the back of my mind. No matter what happens, protect him. She'd said it with eyes that already knew he'd move on too quickly. I'd kept my distance after she passed, pretending that staying away was maturity. But truthfully, I was scared. Scared to see who had replaced her. Scared to face how easily he'd let someone else hold his hand at the dinner table where Mom once sat. I pushed open the ICU door quietly. The rhythmic beeping of machines greeted me like a heartbeat that wasn't quite human. My father lay there, Gideon Carlisle, a man who used to command every room he walked into. Now, he was just a shadow beneath white sheets, tubes feeding him oxygen, eyes closed, chest rising in weak intervals. Sitting beside him was Vera, his new wife. She wore pearls. Who wears pearls to an ICU? Her posture was perfect, her hair immaculate, like she was attending a board meeting instead of a bedside vigil. I lingered by the door for a moment before stepping closer. She didn't notice me, or pretended not to. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, and she leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. "Pull the plug," she murmured. "God's removing the unworthy." I froze. Every muscle in my body locked as if someone had poured ice water through my veins. She didn't look around, didn't flinch. It was as though the words were meant for him alone. And then, God help me, my father moved. His eyelids didn't flutter, his lips didn't part, but his chin dipped in the faintest nod. For a second, the room vanished. No machines, no walls, just that nod. A small, deliberate motion that sliced through me deeper than any knife could. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Did I just imagine that? Was it a reflex? My mind scrambled for logic, for reason, but all I could see was his silent agreement. "Dad," I whispered, but my voice broke before the word finished leaving me. The machines kept beeping. The nurse adjusted in 4-line. Life went on as if nothing had happened. I backed up a step, hand trembling against my notebook. The air in the room felt thinner, the ceiling closer. Vera finally turned to me, slow and deliberate. Her expression was a study in performance, brows furrowed, mouth curved into the faintest, sympathetic pout. "Oh, Molly," she said softly, like she was addressing a child who'd spilled milk. "You startled me." "I heard you," I managed. "You said." She tilted her head. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was smooth, almost gentle. "You must be exhausted, sweetheart. These machines, this waiting, it can make anyone hear things." My pulse hammered in my ears. "Don't do that. Don't make me sound crazy. I'm not doing anything." She smiled, small, polite, chilling. "You're grieving. It's understandable." A nurse passed by, glanced in, and hesitated at the tension. I caught his eyes, desperate for someone to say they'd heard it too. But he just nodded politely and moved on. The room filled again with that antiseptic hum. I swallowed hard, trying to anchor myself. I wasn't losing my mind. I knew what I'd heard. Vera turned back to Dad, brushing invisible dust from his sheet. "He's in God's hands now," she whispered again, just loud enough that I could question whether I was meant to hear it. I wanted to scream, to rip the wires from the wall, to shake my father awake and demand that he deny it. But instead, I stood there, frozen, watching. Time folded in on itself, pulling me backward to another hospital, another bed. My mother, pale and frail, holding my hand. The smell of lilies in the room, the sound of her voice breaking between breaths. "Promise me, Molly," she'd said. "Promise you'll protect him." Back then, I thought she meant his heart. Now, I realized she meant his soul. Because standing in that ICU, I saw something I never wanted to believe: he wasn't a victim of manipulation. He was a participant. The memory of my mother's funeral flashed before me, the cold wind biting my cheeks, the sound of dirt hitting wood. Vera was there too, in black, standing beside my father like she'd earned her place. I remember thinking she looked too composed for a widow's friend. Too polished. She'd placed a gloved hand on his shoulder, and he hadn't pushed it away. Now, looking at them again, it felt like that moment had never ended. Only the flowers had changed. I moved closer to the bed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you say that, Vera?" She blinked innocently. "Say what?" "Pull the plug." "You said it. I heard you." Her smile didn't waver. "Molly, sweetie, you really shouldn't accuse people in front of patients. It's bad energy." Bad energy. That's what she called plotting someone's death. The nurse came back to check a monitor. "Everything okay here?" Vera answered before I could. "Just nerves. She's had a long week." The nurse offered a sympathetic smile my way. "It's tough seeing a parent like this. Try to rest, ma'am." Rest. Right. Rest while the woman who married your father less than a year after your mother's burial whispered for his death. I felt invisible, again. The nurse left, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence returned. I realized my nails were digging into my palm, leaving crescents in my skin. "Vera," I said quietly. "I'm not leaving him alone with you." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "Then we'll both wait," she said, and crossed her legs. I stood there until the fluorescent lights started to flicker, my body a statue carved from disbelief. After what felt like hours, Vera excused herself for coffee. "You can stay with him, of course," she said, voice sugary sweet. "Maybe it'll give you closure." When the door closed, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. I sank into the chair beside the bed. His hand was cold under mine. I searched his face for anything human, any sign that he'd recognize his daughter. "Do you want me gone that badly?" I whispered. No answer. Just that rhythmic beeping and the memory of his nod playing on repeat in my head. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. It was as if grief had turned to iron inside me. I sat there, watching the man who raised me, realizing that love doesn't always survive the kind of silence we built. Eventually, the nurse dimmed the lights. The world outside had shifted from afternoon to the gray of early evening. I stood, gathering my things, and slipped my mother's notebook from my bag. The cover was worn, the corners soft from years of being touched. I opened it, hoping to find comfort, and instead found a single line underlined in her handwriting. "The moment they erase you is the moment you begin writing your own story." I looked at my father one last time, then at the door where Vera had gone. I wasn't erased. Not yet. As I stepped into the hallway, the air hit colder, sharper, almost cleansing. For the first time, I didn't look back. I walked out of that hospital a different woman. But I didn't walk away from the war. I didn't drive home after leaving the hospital. I couldn't. The idea of walking into my empty apartment, pretending to eat dinner, or even hearing the hum of my refrigerator felt unbearable. Instead, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, parked in the hospital's underground garage. The dim yellow lights buzzed faintly overhead, and for the first time, I understood what real numbness felt like. It wasn't sadness. It was a quiet vacancy that settled deep in your bones, heavy and still. I traced my fingers along the edge of my mother's notebook, the one I'd carried since I was 21. Her handwriting was slanted, looping in a way that made it feel alive. I flipped through the pages until I reached the line I'd seen before: "The moment they erase you is the moment you begin writing your own story." Erase me. That word echoed over and over. My mother used to warn me about people who smile when they steal your name. At the time, I thought she meant fake friends, not family. But maybe she'd seen something I hadn't, something already forming in the shadows of our home. I got out of the car and walked back toward the main hospital building. The afternoon sun was fading, slipping behind the skyline. A nurse on her break lit a cigarette near the employee entrance, giving me a sympathetic nod as I passed. Inside, the sterile air returned. I followed the hallway signs until I found the small frosted glass door labeled Legal Affairs, Patient Documentation. A young woman sat behind the counter, her ID badge reading M. Thompson. She looked up, polite but guarded. "Hi," I said, trying to sound calm. "I need to review my father's power of attorney records." Gideon Carlisle. Her fingers froze above her keyboard. "Are you his next of kin?" "Yes. I'm his daughter." She typed for a moment, eyes darting across the screen. Then her tone shifted. "I'm sorry, Miss Carlisle, but you're not listed as having legal authority on his account." Iblinka, unsuraide earthkuragli. Excuse me? The system shows only one authorized representative, a Mrs. Vera Milbourne. My stomach tightened. "That's his wife," I said slowly. "But I'm his daughter. There's no way he would leave me off something like that." She offered a sympathetic smile, the kind that says I don't make the rules. "Maybe speak with her?" Sometimes families consolidate decision rights for convenience. Convenience. That word hit me like a slap. Convenience was how people justified betrayal. "I'd like to see the paperwork," I said, voice steady. "If I'm not listed, I at least want to know why." She hesitated, glancing toward a back office. "One moment." She disappeared behind a door. Through the frosted glass, I could see two silhouettes, her and an older man, gesturing quietly. My pulse thudded in my ears. When she returned, she handed me a single-page copy. "This is what we have on file." It was a power of attorney form, printed 3 days ago. At the bottom, next to my father's name, was a single mark, a thumbprint. Not a signature. I stared at it, my throat drying. This can't be real. He was teaching a calculus class at the senior center last week. He wasn't too weak to sign his name. "I can't comment on that," she said softly. "All I can tell you is this document is verified. The witness signatures are from hospital staff." The names meant nothing to me, strangers, all of them. But the last signature caught my eye. Witness, C. Carlisle. My sister. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Cressida signed this?" The clerk hesitated again. "It appears so." I thanked her, though the word felt like ash in my mouth, and walked out of the office. The hallway felt longer now, every step echoing with disbelief. Outside, the sky had darkened to a steel blue. I needed air, needed something solid to hold on to. But all I had was a piece of paper that said my father's life, and his decisions, belonged to someone else. I found a bench near the hospital garden, sat down, and reread the document under the flickering light of a lamppost. The ink wasn't even dry, it looked fresh. The thumbprint was smudged slightly, uneven. My father had always prided himself on precision, even his grocery lists were neatly aligned. This looked sloppy, forced. He didn't do this willingly. The next morning, I told myself, I'd demand a meeting with the hospital board. I wasn't walking away this time. But waiting wasn't something I was ever good at. So I went back inside. The boardroom was on the 5th floor, behind a door marked "Administrative Use Only." I explained my situation to the receptionist, or tried to. She kept her smile professional, distant. "I'm sorry, Miss Carlisle, but that's not something we can assist with today." "Please," I said, lowering my voice. "You don't understand. There's been a mistake. My father never would have given Vera this authority." She offered the same rehearsed sympathy I'd seen all day. "You're emotionally compromised right now. It's best to let the system handle things." "The system?" I asked. "You mean the one that lets strangers decide when someone lives or dies?" Her smile didn't move. "We follow legal documentation. If you want to contest it, you'll have to go through court." I stepped back, swallowing the frustration rising in my throat. They'd built a wall of bureaucracy so high that logic couldn't climb it. And I realized, the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. Designed to silence people like me. As I walked back toward the waiting area, I caught sight of Cressida through the glass wall of the cafeteria. She was sitting with Vera, calm as ever, stirring sugar into her tea. I stood there for a long time, watching them. The two of them looked like they belonged in a magazine ad, elegance, poise, unity. I, on the other hand, felt like an intruder in my own bloodline. Cressida looked up, meeting my eyes briefly. Her expression didn't change. No guilt, no shock. Just quiet composure. She leaned toward Vera, said something, and they both smiled. It was a familiar smile. The kind they wore in every photo from the last 10 years. Except I wasn't in any of those pictures. I remembered one birthday in particular, my father's 75th. There'd been a big family dinner. I'd offered to take the group photo, standing behind the camera while everyone laughed and posed. "Come on, Molly, get in one," someone had said. "We can take another." But somehow, that second photo never happened. It hit me now, erasure doesn't always happen in a single blow. Sometimes, it's slow. A missing name here, a forgotten invitation there, until one day, you're gone from the frame entirely. I left the cafeteria before either of them could speak to me. I couldn't stomach the small talk, the pretense of civility. Instead, I found an empty chair near the vending machines and sat down. My phone buzzed in my bag. Reflexively, I pulled it out and scrolled through old emails. One from Dad, dated 3 months ago, caught my eye. The subject line was simple: "Don't worry about Vera. We'll talk soon." We never talked. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. The ache in my chest felt deeper than anger. It was the realization that I'd been waiting for a conversation that was never going to happen. Now, Vera had all the control. The paperwork said it. The hospital confirmed it. And the people who were supposed to stand by me, my sister, my own blood, had helped her do it. I exhaled slowly, forcing the tremor out of my hands. There was no point crying. Crying had never changed anything in our family. Action did. I opened my contacts list and scrolled past names I hadn't touched in years, old coworkers, college friends, numbers that belonged to ghosts of past lives. Finally, I stopped at one name: Callahan and Pierce Law. We hadn't spoken since Mom's estate settlement years ago. But if anyone could dig through lies, it was them. My voice was steady when the receptionist answered. "Hi," I said. "This is Molly Carlisle. I need to hire a private attorney. Not for money. For my name." When I hung up, I sat there in silence, feeling something shift inside me, a small flicker where despair had been. Maybe anger. Maybe clarity. Whatever it was, it felt like the beginning of something irreversible. The hospital lights dimmed for the evening shift. I walked toward the exit, the air cool against my skin. The war hadn't ended in that ICU room. It had just changed battlegrounds. The further I looked into the past, the clearer their future plans became. The further I looked into the past, the clearer their future plans became. That thought followed me through the drive out of Boston. The next morning, after a sleepless night and 2 cups of burnt diner coffee, I found myself on the highway heading north toward the old family house in Lexington. The trees lining the road were still bare, their branches like tired arms reaching for something they'd already lost. I rolled down the window halfway, letting the cold morning air sting my face. Before I could fight what they'd built, I needed to remember what they'd buried. I hadn't been back to that house in nearly a decade. Cressida owned it now. She'd inherited it after Mom's estate was restructured. That's what Vera called it, restructured. As if the memories we grew up with were numbers on a spreadsheet. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same and nothing like itself at once. The porch light was still crooked, the way Dad had left it after one of his endless weekend projects. But the lawn was too perfect, trimmed, manicured, and soulless. Even the flower beds seemed unnatural, like someone had copied a catalog photo and pasted it here. The front door was locked, but I still had my old key. It surprised me when it turned smoothly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and nothing else, like someone had wiped away every trace of life. The furniture was polished to a shine. Family photos lined the hallway walls, but the faces in the frames were strangers to me. There was Dad and Cressida at her law school graduation, Vera standing proudly between them. There was a picture from Christmas, everyone in red sweaters, smiling around a tree. Everyone but me. I walked slowly, my hand brushing along the wall where my childhood drawings used to hang. The walls were bare now, freshly painted a color too sterile to have history. In the dining room, the table was set with fine china. No one lived here, not really, it was staged, like a show home waiting for potential buyers. Cold. Pristine. Unforgiving. Of course, I whispered to myself. Even the house forgot me. In the corner of the room, I saw a large framed photo of the whole family standing in front of the house. The sunlight hit their faces just right. Cressida's hand rested on Dad's shoulder. Vera leaned in close, her smile polished and practiced. I searched for myself in that frame. I wasn't there. Not even in the background. I remembered the day that photo was taken. It was after one of Cressida's charity events. I'd been the one taking the picture. Let's take one with you too, Vera had said, handing the camera to a neighbor. But when I looked at the print later, there was only the version without me. The other one was gone. Deleted, maybe. Or never developed. That was the pattern, I realized. My whole life had been cropped, edited out little by little until absence became my assigned place. A flash of memory struck, my 18th birthday. Cressida had turned 21 that same week, so Dad bought her a used car, something shiny and practical. I got a $50 gift card tucked inside a Hallmark envelope. You'll appreciate the value, he'd said, like I was supposed to be grateful for the lesson. Even then, Vera had been hovering in the background, always smiling, always managing. Cressida's older, she'd said once when I complained. It's natural for parents to prioritize differently. Prioritize. Another spreadsheet word. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak underfoot a ghost of my younger self. My old room door was open, but the space inside was empty, just bare walls and a single twin bed covered in a beige comforter. The window still faced the same maple tree, though it looked thinner now, stripped of its shade. I wandered down the hallway toward the attic stairs. The pull string was still there, dangling above the doorframe. I tugged it, and a small ladder creaked down with a sigh. The attic light flickered when I turned it on. Dust particles floated through the beam like tiny ghosts. It smelled the same: wood, insulation, and time. Boxes were stacked neatly in rows, most labeled by Cressida's handwriting: Christmas, old linens, Mom's things. I knelt beside a small box shoved against the wall. The handwriting on it was older, faded. Old decorations. When I peeled back the tape, a puff of dust rose into the air. Inside were things that didn't belong in any inventory: crayon drawings, an old ballet slipper, a cracked snow globe from the Boston Aquarium. My handwriting was all over the papers. My name, Molly, written in uneven block letters on the back of every page. These were mine. I lifted out a small photo of me and Mom in the kitchen. She was teaching me how to roll pie dough. My hair was messy, my hands covered in flour. I'd forgotten this picture existed. The corners were bent, like someone had folded it to hide it away. At the bottom of the box, under a stack of yellowed birthday cards, was an envelope. My heart skipped when I saw my name written across it, in my father's handwriting. The ink was shaky, uneven. I ran my thumb over it before opening it carefully. My dear Molly. I know I haven't been there for you the way I should have. Things have gotten complicated. Vera's helping me fix things, at least I think she is. Maybe when this is all over, we can start again. You've always had your mother's strength. Don't lose it. Love, Dad. The letter was dated exactly 1 week before the power of attorney was signed. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. He'd tried to reach me. He'd wanted to make things right. But someone, had made sure I never got this. I looked around the attic again, at the labeled boxes, at the sterile organization of memories. Cressida's neat handwriting, Vera's system of erasure. The letter was meant for me, but it had been buried here, folded into a box marked old decorations. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling its fragile warmth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, by a man who'd lost his way but still remembered who I was. The light in the attic flickered again, dimming to a golden hue as the sun began to set outside. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was small again, 8 years old, lying in bed while Mom sat beside me, brushing the hair from my face. One day, she'd whispered, "The people who erased you will need you to remember them." At the time, I thought she meant forgiveness. Now I understood she meant evidence. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside my mother's notebook, between 2 pages she'd filled with her own handwriting. A strange calm settled over me. Not peace, exactly, more like direction. When I came back downstairs, the house looked different. It wasn't home anymore, but it wasn't untouchable either. It was a crime scene disguised as family history. I stood in front of the living room wall again, staring at the photos. Each smiling face now looked staged, hollow. I noticed something I hadn't before. On the far edge of one frame, where the glass met the wood, there was a faint outline. The photo had been cropped. You could see half an arm, my arm, cut off at the elbow. It wasn't just that they'd erased me. They'd rewritten the record to pretend I was never there. I walked to the kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and opened it. My hands still smelled faintly of dust and attic air. I typed into the search bar, "Power of Attorney, Elder Fraud, Massachusetts." Dozens of links appeared, case studies, legal articles, survivor stories. I clicked the first one. A headline read, "Family Fraud, When Love Turns Legal." I exhaled slowly. If Vera erased me from the photo, I'd make sure her signature left a digital footprint. If Vera erased me from the photo, I'd make sure her signature left a digital footprint. That thought had become my oxygen. I spent the next 2 days buried in legal websites, news archives, and online databases, my laptop screen glowing through the night. The deeper I dug, the more patterns I found, different names, same stories. Men and women whose families had been rewritten while they were still breathing. Documents changed, wills altered, signatures replaced by thumbprints. Every case had one thing in common: someone always smiled while taking something that wasn't theirs. I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd already lost everything they could take from me. Now all that was left was the truth. That morning, I poured myself a cup of black coffee that had gone cold and stared at the folder on my screen, Carlisle_family_documents. Empty. I didn't have enough proof yet. Just anger and instinct. As I scrolled through articles about fraud and elder manipulation, one phrase stood out: footprint verification. A method used to trace alterations and scan legal documents. The phrase sparked something. If Vera had forged that power of attorney, she'd left a trail. Everyone leaves one. The thought carried me back to that hospital hallway 2 days earlier. The memory played in slow motion. I was standing at the edge of my father's ICU room, pretending not to exist while Vera talked to the doctors. A nurse was adjusting the 4-drip when my father stirred. His fingers twitched, slow and weak, and his eyelids fluttered open for half a second. I moved closer, my breath caught somewhere between hope and dread. "Dad," I whispered, but the nurse didn't notice. His eyes found mine, cloudy, unfocused, but full of something primal. Fear. A desperate kind of recognition. He tried to move his lips, and for an instant, I thought I heard him form a single word: "Wait." The nurse turned to check the monitor, blocking my view. When she stepped aside, his hand had fallen still again. I replayed that moment in my head over and over. That wasn't agreement. That wasn't peace. That was a man trying to fight through fog, to say something before it was too late. Later that night, as I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the message. I saw what they did. I wasn't supposed to record anything. But I did. Celine. My heart jumped. I remembered Celine, Vera's housemaid for years. Quiet, kind, the kind of woman who always seemed to blend into the wallpaper. I hadn't seen her since Mom's funeral. I called the number immediately. She answered in a whisper. "Ms. Molly? Celine? Where are you? I can't talk long. Please. Can we meet? Not at the house. Somewhere quiet. Tell me when and where." There was a pause, then, the parking lot behind St. Anne's Church. 1 hour. The line went dead. I grabbed my coat and keys, my pulse quickening. The drive to St. Anne's was short, but every red light felt like a trap. I pulled into the nearly empty lot and spotted her immediately, sitting on a bench near the old oak tree, wearing a brown coat and clutching a small handbag. When I approached, she looked up, her eyes darting around nervously. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Her accent was heavier than I remembered. "What did you mean by your message?" Celine hesitated, then pulled something small from her pocket, a USB drive. She pressed it into my hand. "I kept this hidden for months. I couldn't watch it again. But you need to." "What's on it?" She looked down. "Your father didn't want to sign anything. He said he wanted to wait for you. But Mrs. Vera." She told the nurse he was ready. She pressed his hand herself. My chest tightened. "You recorded it?" I was cleaning the guest room. "The camera from the security system, it faces the hallway. I saved the footage to my computer. I stayed quiet because I needed the job. But your mother was good to me. I can't stay quiet anymore." "Celine," I said softly, "you did the right thing." She shook her head. "I did it too late." Then, without another word, she stood and walked away, disappearing down the dark street before I could thank her again. I got back in my car, my hands trembling. The USB drive felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I plugged it into my laptop, the hum of the engine filling the silence. For a moment, the screen stayed black. Then a folder popped open, footage_0402. I double-clicked the file. The video was grainy, the date stamp flickering in the corner. The view showed my father's hospital room, captured from the open doorway. He was sitting upright in bed, his face pale but alert. Vera stood beside him, holding a clipboard. Her voice came through faint but clear. "You just need to thumbprint it, Gideon. I'll take care of the rest." He looked exhausted. "Not now," he whispered. "Wait for Molly." Vera smiled, that same rehearsed smile I'd seen 1,000 times at family gatherings. "She's busy, sweetheart. Let's just finish this, okay? Then you can rest." He shook his head weakly. "No, Molly." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You trust me, don't you? You said you did." He hesitated. "Yes, but..." She pressed his thumb against the paper before he could finish. The nurse looked away. The camera caught everything, the force of Vera's hand, the way she steadied his wrist, the trembling in his other hand as he tried to pull back. When the thumbprint was done, she smiled at the nurse. "See? All settled." My stomach churned. My father hadn't signed anything. He'd been manipulated, cornered. I hit pause and stared at the frozen frame. The look on his face was one I'd never forget. Not confusion, resignation. Like he'd realized too late what was happening. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the hum of the car fading into background noise. The anger didn't come all at once, it built slowly, like a tide pulling at the shore. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was crime. I opened my email, attached the video, and sent it to myself twice, one to my main inbox, one to a hidden backup. Then I copied it onto an external drive and another cloud folder under a fake name. If Vera thought she could bury evidence like she buried my childhood, she was wrong. I replayed the video one more time, forcing myself to watch every second. At the end, Vera looked down at my father's still hand and said softly, almost to herself, "You can rest now, Gideon. Everything's taken care of." That last sentence replayed in my mind like a curse. My fingers were shaking as I closed the laptop. The USB drive sat on the passenger seat beside me, its tiny metal surface glinting under the dashboard light. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. The anger that had been simmering since the ICU finally crystallized into focus. There was no going back. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the number I'd saved, Attorney Callahan. When he answered, his voice was low and steady. "Callahan Law." "This is Molly Carlisle," I said, my voice firm. "I have video evidence of elder abuse and document fraud. Do you take clients who aren't afraid to set fire to the lie?" There was a pause on the line, then a quiet exhale. "Miss Carlisle," he said, "I think we should talk in person." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like the same woman who walked into that hospital days ago. There was no fear left in her eyes, only fire. The truth was mine now. But the war was still hers to lose. The truth was mine now, but the war was still hers to lose. That line had become a rhythm in my head, beating in time with every cautious breath I took. Truth, I was learning, wasn't just a weapon. It was a responsibility, one that demanded patience, not rage. I'd seen people ruin themselves by striking too soon. I couldn't afford that. Not when the people I was up against had been perfecting deception for years. For 2 days, I buried myself in preparation. My father's letter, the video from Celine, the official documents, all organized, backed up, and encrypted. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I was his witness. Every night I stared at the USB drive sitting beside my laptop like a loaded gun. Information is power, but only if you know how to use it. And I was done playing the fool. The morning light crept through the blinds of my apartment when my phone buzzed. The screen flashed with an alert, voicemail archive recovered. I frowned. I hadn't used that backup in years, it was tied to my old landline. I opened the message. "Hey kiddo, we need to talk about some paperwork. Vera's rushing something. Call me soon, okay?" The date hit me like a punch, 4 days before the ICU. For a long time, I couldn't move. I replayed the message again and again, just to hear his voice, warm, tired, the slight rasp he always got when he was nervous. I had been one phone call away from stopping all of this. One call that never reached me. Tears welled up before I could stop them. My father had tried. He'd been trying all along. The guilt hit hard, but beneath it was something colder, vindication. I wasn't imagining the manipulation. It had been real, orchestrated, methodical. After sitting frozen for nearly an hour, I grabbed my coat and keys. There was one person left at the hospital who might still have a conscience. The hospital was quieter than I remembered, or maybe I'd just stopped hearing the background chaos. I walked through the corridors with purpose, heading toward the cafeteria. It was around lunchtime when I spotted her, Nurse Danielle, sitting alone, scrolling through her phone, a cup of black tea untouched in front of her. "Danielle?" She looked up, startled. "Miss Carlyle, I didn't expect." "I know," I interrupted softly. "Can I sit?" She hesitated, then nodded. I took the chair across from her. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," I said. "I just need the truth. You were there when my father signed that document. You saw what Vera did." Her eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "I shouldn't be talking about this." "I'm not asking for gossip," I said. "I'm asking for humanity." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, she exhaled. "Your dad kept asking when you'd come. Every time Vera walked in, he'd ask if you'd called. He didn't want to sign anything without you." The words landed heavy, but I kept my expression steady. "Then why didn't you stop it?" Danielle looked pained. "We can't. Not without proof." She said she had legal authority, and the paperwork was in order. "If we interfere without cause, we lose our jobs. Or worse." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You saw what she did, didn't you?" She swallowed hard. He tried to pull his hand back. She said he was tired. That she'd help him finish. The cafeteria suddenly felt too small, too bright. "Danielle," I said quietly, "I have proof now. A recording." Her eyes widened. "Then use it. But be careful. People like her don't lose gracefully." When I left the hospital, the air outside was sharp with winter chill. I stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the gray sky. My father's words, the voicemail, the video, all of it was converging into one clear truth. Vera hadn't just stolen his trust. She'd stolen his voice. I wasn't going to let her steal his memory, too. That evening, I drove to her house, the same house that used to be my mother's. The one that now smelled of imported candles and hollow laughter. The gate was open, the way it always was when she expected guests. I parked by the curb and sat for a few minutes, gathering myself. When I finally walked up to the front door, I could already hear the faint clinking of glasses inside. Vera answered before I could knock twice, wearing silk and the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Molly," she said, feigning surprise. "You look tired. Everything all right?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, setting it gently on the entryway table. "I know everything," I said evenly. "And this," I tapped the flash drive, "is your last warning. If you touch Dad's estate again, I won't just go to court. I'll go public." For the first time, her mask slipped, only slightly, but enough to see the irritation flicker behind her gaze. Then she smiled again, calm and composed. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with practiced pity. "You've always misunderstood me. Everything I've done has been for your father's comfort." "Comfort?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Forcing a dying man to sign his life away?" She tilted her head, the way a teacher might with a misbehaving student. "You think a thumbprint will undo a decade of trust?" I met her stare, steady and unflinching. "I don't need to undo anything. I only need to shine a light." She reached for a bottle of wine and poured herself a glass, unbothered. "Try it," she said. "But you'd better be ready to lose more than you already have." The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at her, at the woman who'd built her empire on manipulation and grief, and realized she wasn't afraid of exposure. She was afraid of irrelevance. People like Vera didn't survive silence. They needed control, and I'd just started taking it away. I turned to leave, but her voice followed me to the door. "Your father was a complicated man, Molly. You see what you want to see. I see what he asked me to do." I paused, glancing back at her. "If you really believe that, then you'll have nothing to worry about when I prove you wrong." Outside, the night was colder than before. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at her house through the windshield. The flash drive was still inside, glowing faintly under the hallway light. I didn't need to threaten her again. The seed was planted. Back home, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the couch with my laptop. My living room was small but warm, a stark contrast to Vera's museum of pretense. I opened my encrypted drive and began the process of backing up every file I had, the video, the voicemail, scanned copies of the power of attorney, screenshots of text logs. Each folder went into a separate cloud service, labeled under harmless names, recipes_2018, book notes, work invoices. Then I opened a notebook and began writing. To do. Meet with attorney Callahan. Contact journalist from the Boston Ledger. Locate next of kin witnesses. Obtain medical reports from nurse Danielle, if possible. Prepare statement. The list wasn't just a plan, it was a promise. As I typed, a small wave of exhaustion hit me. I realized I hadn't eaten all day. I made tea, sat back down, and stared at my father's photo on the side table. The same man who once told me that justice wasn't loud, it was persistent. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. I wasn't expecting anyone. My pulse quickened as I set my mug down and walked to the door. A courier stood on the porch, holding a thick envelope. Delivery for Ms. Molly Carlyle. From who? I asked. He checked the label. Milbourne Legal Associates. I signed for it, my stomach tightening. When he left, I tore open the envelope. Inside was a stack of papers, crisp and heavy. At the top, bold letters read, Petition for Summary Probate, filed by Vera Milbourne. For a long moment, I stood frozen, the papers trembling in my hands. She'd beaten me to the next move. The war had officially gone public. I smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. So she wanted a war in court? I whispered to myself. Fine. I brought matches and gasoline. So she wanted a war in court? Fine. I brought matches and gasoline. That line echoed in my head as I poured myself a cup of bitter coffee the next morning. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't even angry, at least not in the way I had been. This was different. Controlled. Focused. I'd been a victim long enough. No more waiting for someone else to deliver justice. I was going to hand-deliver it myself. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of my laptop. I had documents open on 3 different screens, each one another piece of the puzzle. The will Vera had filed, the power of attorney forged under her thumb, and the video from Celine, all laid out like evidence in a trial that hadn't started yet. I was preparing for war. Just after 9, my email notification chimed. At first, I ignored it, probably another court notice or automated alert. But the subject line stopped me cold. Subject, the will she didn't want you to see. From Anonymous. My heart thudded once, hard. I hesitated for a second, then opened it. Attached was a single scanned document, old and slightly faded, dated 2 weeks before Dad's hospitalization. The first line nearly knocked the air from my lungs. Last will and testament of Gideon Carlyle. And below it, in his unmistakable handwriting. I, Gideon Carlyle, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby leave all personal and financial assets to my youngest daughter, Molly Carlyle. I revoke any previous wills and codicils. At the bottom, his signature. Clear, deliberate. And a date, one that matched the week he'd sent that last voicemail I never got. I read the paragraph 3 times before I could even breathe. It was all there, his real intent. Not the manipulation Vera had filed, not the fraud she'd engineered with her lawyers, but his truth. I leaned back in my chair and let the moment settle. This wasn't just hope. This was a spark. All right, Dad, I whispered. Let's burn this down. I printed the document, slipped it into a folder, and drove straight to his old office downtown, the one Vera had left untouched because it wasn't her taste. The building smelled like old books and dust, the kind of scent that carried memory in every corner. I hadn't been here since I was 25, back when Dad still called me kiddo, and left notes on my desk reminding me to eat something. His office door creaked as I pushed it open. The desk was still there, neat as ever. Files stacked by category, pens aligned, his leather chair pushed in just so. I half expected him to walk in behind me. I started digging. Old receipts. Letters. Handwritten drafts of the same will that had just been sent to me anonymously. The handwriting matched perfectly. His pen pressure, the signature curve on the G. There was no doubt this was real. Then something caught my eye, a small folder labeled donations and grants. Inside were several receipts for charity contributions. Most were straightforward, local hospitals, research funds. But one stopped me cold. A check for $25,000. The recipient line read, Bright Futures Foundation. That was the nonprofit I had founded 5 years ago, before Vera convinced Dad it was a money pit. But the donor name on the receipt wasn't his. It was hers. Vera Milbourne. She had donated using his money, under her name. My work. My foundation. Her signature. I sat back, the anger finally starting to rise again, not wild this time, but sharp, honed. Every good deed my father had ever done, she'd rewritten to serve herself. Even generosity wasn't sacred to her. I gathered every piece of proof I could find, tucking the folder under my arm before leaving. Outside, the afternoon sky was pale and brittle, like the calm before a storm. I drove straight to a notary office in Cambridge, the kind of place that smelled of paper and legal ink. The man behind the counter, gray-haired, quiet, looked up when I placed the documents in front of him. I need a certified verification, I said. And I want this scanned for digital timestamp validation. He raised an eyebrow but nodded. Whose signature? My father's. It took him less than 10 minutes to confirm what I already knew. It's legitimate, he said, handing me the notarized copy. Original ink pressure, consistent flow, verified date. He looked up at me over his glasses. You have something real here, Miss Carlyle. If I were her, I'd be worried. I managed a thin smile. Oh, she should be. When I got back to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed Vera's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth as ever. Molly, darling. What now? I didn't bother with pleasantries. You filed for probate too soon, I said. Turns out the real will gets its day in court. There was silence on the line, just the faint clink of glass in the background. Then her tone hardened. You don't have the guts to take me down. I laughed quietly. You're confusing me with someone who used to care about your approval. Her breath hitched for just a second. You think a piece of paper changes anything? Gideon trusted me. Everyone knows that. Everyone also knows paper doesn't lie, I said, and hung up before she could reply. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like a storm she couldn't predict. Back at my apartment, I got to work. I uploaded everything, the video, the notarized will, the digital timestamps, into 3 separate encrypted drives. One under my name, one under Attorney Callahan's, and one under a hidden alias. I backed them up to clouds, offline storage, even sent one copy to a journalist I knew from college who specialized in estate fraud. Then I wrote the email subject line that made my stomach twist with satisfaction. The Carlyle case, press material, confidential. I wasn't bluffing anymore. If Vera wanted a war, I'd make sure everyone was watching. As night fell, I sat at my desk, my laptop light casting shadows across the room. I opened a folder on my computer labeled Legacy. Inside were photos of my parents, Mom smiling in the kitchen, Dad standing proudly beside her, the life that used to be ours before it was rewritten. I whispered to their faces, You erased me from the family, Vera. I'm erasing you from the legacy. Just before midnight, as I was preparing to shut everything down for the night, my inbox pinged again. Subject, You think you're winning. Let me remind you who I married. No name. No body text. Just an attachment, a PDF document. I hesitated, then opened it. It was a legal challenge. A temporary injunction, filed that same day, blocking the newly discovered will from entering the probate record. The basis? Emotional instability of the claimant, Molly Carlyle, due to grief and familial bias. My jaw tightened. So that was her next move, questioning my sanity, my stability, my right to even speak for him. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pulse of anger settle into something more powerful, resolve. She wasn't fighting for love, I murmured. She was fighting to keep control, and she just pulled her dirtiest move yet. She wasn't fighting for love. She was fighting to keep control, and she just pulled her dirtiest move yet. I woke up with that thought spinning through my mind, like a needle stuck on a record. My body felt heavy, my chest tight as if I'd held my breath through the night. But in that heaviness there was clarity. This was no longer about inheritance. This was about truth. I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window in my apartment, watching Boston traffic crawl past the gray morning sky. I could feel the weight of what I was about to do, and oddly, it made me feel alive. I'd rehearsed this moment endlessly. My father's letter, the video, notarized proof, insurance documentation, it all pointed to the same thing. Someone built a house of lies and I was going to tear off the wallpaper. By mid-morning, I found myself in the courthouse, seated in a row where half the people waited with their phones out and worried smiles. On the other side of the glass, Vera arrived, dressed in black, flawless, holding herself like a widow in mourning. Cressida sat beside her, the picture of composure. I recognized the look, the kind women give when they believe themselves untouchable. The judge entered and the hearing began. Vera's lawyer opened with a practiced tone, "Your Honor, the estate document filed by Molly Carlyle lacks credible substantiation." He didn't finish. I rose when it was my turn. With calm voice I said, "Your Honor, I represent the true intent of my father, Gideon Carlyle. The will I'm presented today is signed, dated, and witnessed. I intend to prove it." I slid the video printout and the notarized will across the table. Cameras clicked. Vera's face tightened. My father's loyal nurse and Celine, the housemaid, sat at different tables. Their testimonies were cued. The judge leaned forward. "We will recess until further evidence is submitted." I sat down, heart pounding, but hidden behind a practiced calm. The fire inside me was real. I wanted eyes to see me now. Outside the courthouse, I gave a brief statement to a waiting reporter. When family isn't blood, it's business. And when business runs on betrayal, someone has to pay. 2 hours later, I posted the piece online under the title, "When Family Isn't Blood, It's Business." Within hours, Elder Rights Network shared it. Comments poured in, "My aunt tried the same thing. Thank you for speaking up." I read them and felt not alone for the first time in years. Then I discovered the hidden insurance policy. A chance call to Dad's financial planner confirmed, there was a life insurance policy, $850,000, naming Molly Carlyle as sole beneficiary. Vera had tried to void it 3 days before the ICU. As the planner spoke, I sat rigid in my chair and wrote it down. Money, legacy, everything she'd claimed as her own was slipping. Later that day, square in front of Vera's lawn, she held a staged vigil. Candles, a choir, media crews. She sobbed, held tight to Dad's framed photo, Cressida by her side, clutching a bouquet. I drove quietly to the curb, stepped out, and stood with a small framed copy of Dad's true will in my hand and the insurance claim printout in the other. I didn't join her chant. I didn't need to. I gave the cameras a silent nod and walked past. Reporters followed. I pressed a folder into one of their hands. Inside, proof, time-stamped images, witness statements. I didn't speak until they surrounded me. Love doesn't need to forge signatures. Legacy doesn't need lawsuits. I handed each a USB stick and turned away. Not theirs. No anger. Just the dignity of someone who refused to erase. Back at my apartment that evening, I thought the fight was over. I prepared dinner, checked emails, closed my laptop. Then a ping. From, unknown. Subject, "You think it's over. But it never is," asked Cressida. My fingers froze. Cressida? What does she have to do with any of this? I shut my laptop and stared at the screen in silence. Turns out, Vera wasn't the only one I had unfinished business with. That thought haunted me long after I read that email. The name Cressida had always lingered in my life like the faint smell of perfume that never quite leaves the room, familiar, pleasant from afar, but suffocating when it lingers too long. My older sister had perfected the art of soft betrayal. Hers came not from cruelty, but from silence, from what she allowed to happen. From what she didn't say when it mattered most. Sometimes betrayal comes in whispers. Sometimes, in family group texts. The morning sunlight slanted through the blinds, drawing stripes across the kitchen counter. I sat there, my hands around a mug that had gone cold, reading the subpoena that had arrived an hour earlier. Cressida Carlyle, witness, required to testify. I didn't even have time to process before the doorbell rang. The knock that followed wasn't polite, it was hesitant, soft, the kind that came from guilt. When I opened the door, she stood there. Cressida. Same expensive coat, same gold earrings she'd inherited from Mom, though she always insisted Vera gave them to her. Her face looked tired. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her without perfect makeup. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, voice low. "It already went too far," I replied. She held up a small box, old, taped shut, the corners worn. "Dad meant for you to have this," she whispered. I kept it. I was jealous. I didn't say a word. Just stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me, setting the box gently on the table as if it might explode. We sat opposite each other, like two strangers sharing a meal they didn't want to eat. I shouldn't have come, she murmured, eyes on the box. But you did, I said quietly. So talk. For a long moment, she didn't. Then, as if a dam broke, she exhaled and began. You think Vera manipulated only Dad, she said, her voice trembling. But she did it to all of us. To me. To you. She convinced me I wasn't enough unless I sided with her. She fed me this story, that you were always reckless, always ungrateful. And I believed her. I folded my arms. You believed her because it was easier than believing me. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I helped her, Molly. I helped her hide things. Letters you sent to Dad, I kept them. She told me he didn't need the stress. That he'd just get upset reading them. I told myself it was kindness. But I knew better. My throat tightened, but I kept my tone steady. You did it to protect yourself. That's what Vera teaches, isn't it? Self-preservation disguised as virtue. Cressida nodded slowly. I became mom to please Vera. No, I said sharply. You became mom to erase her. The silence that followed was raw. It wasn't the silence of strangers, it was the silence of family who knew exactly how to wound each other. Finally, she reached for the box and slid it toward me. I can't fix what I did. But this maybe it helps. The tape peeled away with a soft crack. Inside was a collection of things that looked almost fragile in their ordinariness, an old photo album, a flash drive, a folded letter addressed in Dad's handwriting, for Molly. My fingers trembled as I opened the album first. Photos of me and Dad, the fishing trip at Lake Winnipesaukee, my first piano recital, our Thanksgiving road trip when Mom was still alive. Each photo had a note scrawled beside it in his handwriting, she caught the biggest fish. She laughed so hard she cried. She reminds me of her mother. I could barely breathe. The flash drive held recordings, his voice, narrating bedtime stories. I didn't even need to play them to remember the rhythm of his words, the way he used to change his tone for each character. And then the letter. If you're reading this, I'm sorry I took so long to see you. I should have fought harder to protect what we built. You were right about Vera. You were always right. I just didn't want to admit how lonely I'd become. If anything happens to me, promise me one thing, don't let her turn you into what she turned us into. Stay real, kiddo. My tears finally fell, not from sadness, but from release. The next morning, court was packed. Cameras flashed outside. Reporters whispered my name as I walked in, but I ignored them. This was it, the final hearing. Cressida sat at the witness table, her hands clasped tightly together. Vera, dressed in black again, looked like a grieving saint. I didn't need to see her to feel the performance radiating off her. When Cressida was called, she stood, trembling slightly, but resolute. The judge asked her to swear in. She did. Miss Carlyle, the attorney began, you've been closely associated with both parties. Can you confirm who had control over your father's finances in the months before his passing? Cressida swallowed. Vera Milbourne, she said clearly. And were you aware of any documents forged or signed under duress? Yes. Her voice cracked. I witnessed Vera press his thumb against the power of attorney while he was sedated. He didn't want to sign it. Gasps rippled through the room. Vera's lawyer immediately objected, but the judge silenced him. And what about the relationship between your sister and your father? Cressida looked over at me. For once, there was no contempt in her eyes. He loved her. He trusted her. And we, her voice faltered, we let him forget that. I felt something inside me loosen, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. When it was my turn, I presented everything, the notarized will, the insurance records, the memory box, and a transcript of Dad's recorded message. The judge's gavel came down after nearly 2 hours of arguments and evidence. Based on testimony, verified documents, and corroborating evidence, she said, the court hereby voids the power of attorney granted to Mrs. Vera Milbourne. The court recognizes Molly Carlyle as the rightful executor of Gideon Carlyle's final will. The room erupted in murmurs. Vera stood up, eyes blazing, muttering something about appeals and lies. She pushed past the cameras and stormed out. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Not lighter, just cleaner. Cressida walked beside me, quiet, her coat pulled tight against the wind. I don't forgive you, I said finally. Not yet. Maybe never. She nodded. I'll earn it. If you let me. We reached the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them all. I had no interest in headlines anymore. I wanted peace, the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from finally putting down the sword. That night, I went home and opened the flash drive from the box. My laptop screen glowed softly in the dark. I pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room, warm, steady, the way it used to sound before everything fell apart. When someone loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, then you become real. He was reading The Velveteen Rabbit. The same story Mom used to read to me before bed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt real. The war had ended, but as I stepped into the soft morning light that first Saturday after the ruling, I understood peace wouldn't simply arrive at my doorstep. I had to build it. The dawn spilled gold across my living room window, and I sat there in my robe, my coffee steaming in a mug bearing a faded Boston Red Sox logo. Dad had given it to me years ago, and I allowed myself a moment of quiet I'd avoided for too long. The ache in my chest remained, but its sharpness dulled into something I could carry rather than be crushed by. Justice had been done, yet joy didn't rush in. Instead, there was a hush, an empty space where dread once lived. I felt relief, yes, but a subdued one, like exhaling a long-held breath. My father's name, Gideon Carlisle, was restored. His legacy reclaimed. The fraud undone. But I also knew, foundations built on blood and years of neglect don't soften overnight. Scene 1, The Aftermath. By early afternoon, the online headlines had moved on. Vera Milbourne's disappearance from the public sphere was quieter than expected. She'd slipped away without the grand farewell she had once orchestrated in our front yard, a staged vigil, lights, cameras, tears. Now, nothing. A few speculation posts in celebrity-obsessed corners of the internet, then silence. The gossip machine had no fuel. Meanwhile, I got short messages from Cressida. Thanks for standing up for Dad, read one. I hope we can talk soon, read another. I didn't respond. Not yet. There was too much left undone, too many years of silence to resolve with a text. I placed my father's notebook on the mantel, next to my mother's framed sketch of us at the beach when I was 10. The house felt softer, less like a battlefield. Scene 2, A Visit to the Grave. Late afternoon, I drove to empty Auburn Cemetery. The sky was high and pale. At Dad's gravestone I set down the old recorder and pressed play. His voice, warm and shaky, read from The Velveteen Rabbit. When someone loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, then you become real. I smiled through the sadness. He wasn't perfect, he acknowledged that, and I forgave him for not seeing in time. I said aloud, you weren't perfect. But you tried in the end. That's more than most. I stayed until the sun dipped low, the stone casting long shadows across the path. As I walked back to the car, a piece of cool spring air settled in, and I realized I was holding on to his promise, not his mistakes. Scene 3, The Support Circle. Back in my neighborhood community center that evening I joined a support meeting for families impacted by elder abuse and family fraud. I listened while others shared stories of parents stripped of dignity, of adult children locked out. When my turn came I said, I didn't lose a father. I lost the time I could have had with him. But I fought for what mattered. And I didn't let the silence win. Heads nodded, eyes moist. We were strangers, but we carried the same weight. After, I lingered to talk with a woman whose father was still in a dispute over his estate. She thanked me quietly. I placed my hand on her shoulder and said, you'll get there. Because I knew we would. Scene 4, What Healing Looks Like. Monday morning I reopened my nonprofit, renaming it the Real Ones Foundation. The event hall was modest, a rental space in Cambridge, but filled with vibrancy. A banner hung at the entrance, Dad's photo beside Mom's, both smiling. My new mission, legal aid and advocacy for seniors facing energetic but unscrupulous partners. Volunteers arrived in T-shirts with the foundation's name. At the desk a young man asked, Miss Carlisle, do you really think one nonprofit can make a difference? I looked at him and said, I don't know about big change yet. But I do know the first step is showing up. We filled folders with resource lists, attorneys, elder rights groups. I felt something shift inside, momentum, purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was giving the story a direction. Scene 5, a letter never sent. Late that night, with the city quiet and my apartment lamp casting soft glows, I wrote a letter addressed to my future self. You were right to remember. You were right to fight. I wrote about the years I wished back, the love I still held, the boundaries I now set. I added, forgiveness is not forgetting. It's refusing to let pain define you. I folded it, placed it in a wooden box labeled "Open on the day you finally feel peace." I closed it, exhaled. I didn't feel peace yet, or maybe I did, in a small way. Enough to place the lid on the box and walk away. Final closing. The next morning I stepped out onto my front porch, gentle light touching the wood beneath my feet. A small robin hopped onto the railing, its head cocked curiously. I smiled without thinking. "Good morning, Dad," I whispered, glancing toward the sky. "I think I'm ready to live again." I felt his presence, not as a shadow, but as quiet company. The foundation, the truths uncovered, the battles fought, they were all tethered to something that now felt free. The legacy restored, yes. But more than that, my life reclaimed. Sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't from strangers, they're carved quietly by the people we once trusted most. This story reminds us that silence can be just as dangerous as betrayal, and justice often begins when someone dares to speak the truth out loud. What would you have done in Molly's shoes? Do you believe forgiveness is always possible, or are some betrayals too deep to mend? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe